So I've been using this, the M2 MacBook Air, for the last 4 days, and now I've got some thoughts on it. So since I made my video about 3 or 4 days ago, I've been using this M2 MacBook Air as my main machine, my daily driver. It's done everything from video editing, audio editing, and just general admin and content consumption, but it's put me in a great position to have a look at it and tell you whether I think you should buy it. As ever with new Macs, there are good and bad points. And one of the things that surprised me was the charging. It just seems slow to me. This is the 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU with 512 gigs of storage. Out of the box, it comes with the dual port 35-watt charger. Now, I had read that the charger knows what devices you've got plugged into it and will appropriate the power accordingly, which one needs more. When I first used the charger on this MacBook Air, I had the iPhone plugged in with it as well. And I thought maybe that was slowing it down. So over the weekend, when I needed to charge it again, I made sure just to have the MacBook Air plugged in, but it was still slow. Now, it doesn't affect me so much because I tend to leave my MacBook Air on trickle charge overnight. But if you're looking for a rapid charge, if your lifestyle and workflow means that you need a rapid charge during the day to get out the door, then you might want to look at the other quicker chargers. I think there's a 67-watt chargers out there that might suit you better, because out of the box, I was really surprised how slow this MacBook Air charged. Just a little observation, but something I thought you might like to know. So if you watch the video that I put up over the weekend, you'll know that I took this out of the box on Friday and got to work on it. I didn't charge it at all. Out of the box, it had about 85% charge in it, and it did really well. It saw me through till late in the evening and virtually did the whole edit and render on that charge. I had to plug it in just before the end. It's fanless, as you know, which means it's got a wonderfully quiet working environment, as you'd expect. And it's hot in the UK at the moment. I mention that for a reason, because the only way this MacBook Air can cool down is from the ambient air outside. Now, it is really warm at the moment here in the UK, and it didn't struggle. It stayed cool through that whole video day of rendering, editing, exporting. It stayed cool the whole time. The only time that I noticed this MacBook Air getting warm, fun enough, was over the weekend when I was syncing Dropbox. And at that point, it got uncomfortably warm, almost too warm to have on my lap. I don't know why, I don't know what was going on, but that's the only time that I've noticed it get warm. But the battery life is as good as you've heard. I got used to battery life on Apple Silicon with my M1 MacBook Pro, and this carries on in the same vein. You can work the entire day without a charger. You don't need to be near a wall. You don't need to be near an outlet. You can just go out the door and carry on working. Don't forget, I was putting this through heavy loading as well with video work on it. So the battery life is good, and it really does stay cool the whole time, apart from that one instance. If you know why that is, let me know. And one other point to mention was some of the apps were slightly slower to open than I thought. Now, maybe this is an Adobe thing. I know there's much been said about Adobe and Apple Silicon. It's supposed to be optimized. I'm not sure yet if it is. If I just show you opening up Premiere Pro, for instance, you can see it takes a few more bounces, a few seconds longer than I would have thought that it would have done. The same with Photoshop. Again, you just have to wait a few seconds for it to open up. And I understood Apple Silicon to be super snappy. Everything should open in a flash. Now, maybe if I was using Logic and Final Cut, I'd find things were quicker. But I was just surprised that a few apps seemed to take a little bit longer to open than I thought. So I started working on this M2 MacBook Air here in the studio. You saw the video that I was working on late into the night here. And universal control worked absolutely fine in the office here with the iPad and the iMacs I've got here, but it's a different story when I got it home, and that surprised me. At home, I had the M2 MacBook Air, I had the M1 MacBook Pro, and that's linked to a studio display. And then universal control became very flaky. It worked initially and then just stopped, and it was in and out for the whole weekend. No matter what I did, I couldn't get it to be reliable. And considering these are both Apple Silicon machines and brand new as well, I was really surprised that some of these native apps that we want to use across the range in the ecosystem just didn't work as seamlessly as I thought. Maybe that's something that can be sorted out. Maybe it's peculiar to me. Let me know if you've had any problems with universal control. But that was another one of the little small problems that I found over the weekend. But on the whole, we are talking really small problems. Now, I'm sure you will have heard all the stories about the SSD speeds on these M2 MacBook Airs. As I say, this is the 512 gig, so I think it's in a slightly better place than the base model. But even so, I did notice a small issue just once or twice over the weekend. It was on the video that I was working on that went out last weekend. Basically, in Premiere Pro, on the display monitor, I would drag the playhead along and the screen would just go black. and not find the image that I was looking for. And equally, the audio was coming from much earlier in the video edit. I don't know what was going on. And the only way I found to get around it was to alter the playback speed. On here, I'm able to edit at full resolution playback. But the only way I found of getting around that was to drop it down to half or to quarter so that I could get rid of that black screen and actually see the image and hear the audio that I wanted at that point where the playhead was. So I'm guessing that was probably something to do with a RAM memory swap. It would seem to fit in with that. But it passed fairly quickly, and that was the only time that I noticed any issues with it. Other than that, I was editing off of the SSD on this machine, and it did the whole job really, really well. In fact, I was surprised how much I liked working on this machine. It didn't feel small, the screen didn't feel inhibitive at all. I was working, as you know, on a full timeline in Premiere Pro, and it seemed absolutely fine to me. It was just that one or two instances when I think it was struggling to keep up with the RAM memory swap that I was asking of it at that time. Now, I wanted to get more RAM on here, as you may know, but of course, on launch day, that wasn't possible. But if you're looking to buy one of these machines, I would suggest that would be somewhere where your money might want to go, depending, of course, upon what your workflow is. A couple of other small points that are worth mentioning to you was I found the keyboard really, really comfortable to use. It's exactly the same as the M1 MacBook Pro that I've got. The only thing that I found with having reasonably big hands was that the edge of the chassis, the edge of the body, was digging into my hands just a little bit. It's not sharp, but it's just a little bit uncomfortable where your hands and your wrists tend to rest. Again, it's unavoidable. It is a smaller body for its portability, and its portability is amazing. It is so light. That's the one thing I think I mentioned as soon as I picked it up on the video at the weekend, was just how light it is, and that still amazes me now. The fingerprints, as you know, are an issue. I clean this off before starting, but as soon as you begin to touch it, you will notice fingerprints do attract to the colour. I still think it's the nicest colour of all. I'm glad I chose this colour. I think the other colours are just a little bit bland, but you will need some microfiber cloths, if you're as fussy as I am, to keep this body looking clean, because it really does attract any grease that you've got on your hands at all. But the good news is, as I say, it polishes off really, really quickly. So talking about speakers on any video is really tough, because I could play some music on here, but I'm just using a pickup mic and it wouldn't really let you know how it sounds. And again, it depends how you're listening to it at your end. Just take my word as an audio man that they're pretty good. This is a portable notebook. You're not going to want to hook it up to desktop speakers. It's not what it's designed for. It has got the high impedance headphone jack if that matters to you. But to be honest, the speakers are okay. Yes, I've got used to the speakers on the MacBook Pro, which are obscenely good for any laptop. It's a 6-speaker setup in there. It's a much thicker body. It's got a lot more air around the speakers, which clearly helps to give a better sound reproduction. But the speakers in here are good. They're probably the higher end of any laptop that you'd want. And I think you could quite happily sit and listen to music during the day. I tend to always use my AirPod Pro when I'm working on them. They obviously sync really easy, and I like the sound in those better than the built-in speakers. But there is a fairly wide sound separation on here as well, and it works great with spatial audio and Dolby Atmos if you're watching that kind of content as well. So the sound, the speakers, yeah, it's okay. So when it comes to the camera, they told us it was exactly the same camera in this MacBook Air as it was in the MacBook Pro. I'm not sure if that's the case. Given all the trouble that they've got with supply chain at the moment, it's quite possible they had to change the units that actually ended up going in here. And this is the 1080p webcam on the M2 MacBook Air. I don't think the colour is too bad, actually. The framing looks decent, the height of the camera's okay. I'm about 10 to 12 inches away from it. And as I say, if you're making a load of Zoom or FaceTime calls using this M2 MacBook Air and the built-in mics and webcam, I don't think you're going to have many complaints, are you? It looks okay to me. Which means I've just got one more question to answer, and that is, would I recommend that you buy the M2 MacBook Air? Yeah, it's a great machine. To be honest, it's really, really surprised me how good it is to work on over these last 4 days. And as you know, you saw me edit a 15-minute 4K multicam video on here, and it didn't even break a sweat, bar those odd couple of moments in Premiere Pro. To get around that, I suggest if you are buying this, spec it up with 16 gigs of unified memory, and if you can afford a little bit more onboard storage, I love onboard storage, try and go for the terabyte rather than the 512 that I've got here. But other than that, it's a great machine to use. The screen is amazing, and it's such a joy to use. Honestly, if you're looking to keep that productive workflow going while you're out on the road, then this M2 MacBook Air is definitely a Mac you should look at. I hope you enjoyed this video. Why don't you hang around for a few minutes longer, because I'm going to let you know what it was like after my first 2 months with the studio display. I'll catch you next time.